Chapter 21. JJ leaned against his truck holding the gas nozzle inside the tank. He slowly filled his truck up, whistling to himself. It had been a couple days since he laid waste to the congressman, and JJ had been on the run. The Cajun had no clue what he was going to do now that he was labeled an outlaw. If not now, then soon they would send his own coworkers after him. A black car swung into the gas station pulled behind JJ's Ford. Johnny noticed that he was the only vehicle at the pump, leaving the other three empty. It was very suspicious that the car pulled up behind Johnny's truck. JJ pushed himself off the truck and stood up straight, his guard on high alert and ready to act. He wasn't sure what he was going to do. He knew he couldn't hurt a fellow officer, being he was one or used to be one, but he didn't want to go to jail either. He watched the car for a moment before another car pulled up in front of his truck now, and JJ knew something was up. He gripped the gas nozzle in his hand as he watched the one car that pulled up in front of him. His heart was racing as he knew this was it. He had been caught. Jonathan Simoneaux? A male's voice rang out from behind him, and JJ whipped around. A white dark-haired male wearing a dark suit stepped out from behind his truck, and JJ pointed the nozzle at him. The male raised his hands and halted. "Mr. Simoneaux, I just want to talk." He spoke in a calm manner. "Who are you?" "State." "FBI?" JJ asked as his nerves were on edge. A couple other men from the car in front of his truck got out and started walk towards him. They were both Latino and wearing almost the same color suit as the other male. JJ spun around and pointed the nozzle at them. "Hey! Hey!" JJ screamed, warning them. The men went to reach for their guns, but the other male raised his hands. "There is no need for that. Guys, let me have a word with Mr. Simoneaux, just us two." JJ looked back and forth between the two men in front of him and the one man behind him. "I'm not here to take you in, Mr. Simoneaux. I just want a word or two, if that is all right with you. Guys, why don't you give me and Mr. Simoneaux privacy?" he told the other two guys in front of him. The two Latinos walked backwards to the car while the other male advanced towards JJ. JJ noticed him advancing and pointed the nozzle at him. "There is no need for that, Mr. Simoneaux. I am here to help you. My name is Kevin O'Neill." He held out his hand to shake JJ's, but JJ just glared at him. Kevin slowly drew back his hand slowly. Kevin understood why JJ didn't trust to shake his hand and didn't take offense. "You can put that away if you wish. I'm not here to bring you in. I'm here to help you, give you a job, so to speak." JJ couldn't help but be curious now. He lowered the nozzle slightly. Kevin paused a moment longer but continued when noticed JJ listening intently now. "I have to be honest with you. I pray you keep this between me and you, since you are a wanted fugitive at large, and I am your only hope to see that A, you never have to serve time behind bars, and B, bring the people responsible for your brother's death to justice." The last part caught JJ's attention big time. He put the nozzle back in the slot and stepped forward. "What do you know about that?" JJ's tone had a hint of anger. Kevin smiled a bit, knowing he had JJ's full attention now, and walked in a bit closer towards the Cajun. "Do I have your word of confidentiality?" Kevin asked. JJ nodded, signaling he would keep this conversation between the two. "I am a CIA undercover agent. Those two men and my driver, they work for the Alvarez cartel. I have been undercover with the cartel for many years now, and the current situation shifted in my favor. I'm telling you this because I was supposed to take out the congressman, The cartel he was in bed with was afraid he would squeal on them and the company they were working to acquire here in the States. You, my good man, beat me to the punch. It was a pretty good hit, making it look like an accident. Also, I have gathered intel on you recently, a small-town police officer that has had a recent heartbreak. Your brother, he was killed at the hands of the congressman? Anyways, enough small talk. Kevin leaned against JJ's truck a bit. Kevin remembered the cop that was killed that night. He knew the congressman was long gone before his death, but he didn't tell JJ this. He needed this man to help him keep tabs on things. The CIA and the cartel had a rough relationship, and if things fell thought, the blame for everything of course would fall on the cartel. The US government was great at covering up things. Marina, the leader of the cartel's daughter, is looking to put together a group of elite hitmen, assassins, and mercenaries. I am already a part of this group, and she is looking to fill one more spot. I want you to be part of this group. JJ just looked at him sideways. Work for them? Are you crazy? I want them dead. I don't want to work for them. Kevin raised a hand up to calm him down again. You can't take on this whole cartel alone, Mr. Simoneaux. Having another man on the inside and on the same team would benefit me greatly. You want to take care of the people responsible for your brother's death? Here is your chance. I will make sure to tell my superiors that you will be working for us and your crimes forgiven. Don't let those years served in law enforcement be wasted because of a criminal. I know you are a good man, Mr. Simoneaux. You just have had a bump in the road. I am here to help you along and see that your name is restored. Also, you will be doing your country a great honor with serving justice to these fugitives. Bringing down this cartel and the businesses associated with them will put a dent in crime and help others. Isn't that the whole reason you became a cop, Mr. Simoneaux? To protect the innocent and bring the bad guys in? JJ let the words float around in his head and jumble with other thoughts. Kevin was right. He was a good man and a good officer. Just recently he had been dealt a crappy deck. He ran so many scenarios through his head and started to mutter to himself, I am very close to closing this down, Marina, and this group will be the death of them, I am sure. I will be able to find out the company they are in bed with and bring them all to justice. Kevin again lied. The agent knew all this already. Heck, he met with William Green just a couple hours ago, but he saw an opportunity before him. Somebody to blame if anything went south. JJ took his hat off and ran his hand through his hair and sighed. It was a lot to take in all at once. This O'Neill was right. It was the only way. Any other way JJ would be killed for sure. You are probably thinking, why am I telling you all this confidential material? But to be honest, I'm desperate. I am very close in gathering the intel, and I need another man on the inside. Someone who knows what must be done and will help me greatly. It will also benefit you, Mr. Simoneaux. Johnny nodded. I know what you are saying, but how the hell am I going to even get in? I mean, they can easily look up and see that I am a cop. He leaned against his truck and looked out over the highway. You just killed a United States congressman. You are a fugitive in the eyes of the law. It is the perfect reason to switch sides, to get back at the government that screwed you over. Kevin explained. So, like a double agent? JJ asked, lifting a brow and looking at Kevin. Kevin's lips curved to a small smile as he nodded. Yes, you could say that. A chance to take out this cartel, their business associates, and give your brother justice. Kevin extended his hand out again towards JJ. JJ looked down at and sighed before slowly taking it. He shook it firmly in agreement. Follow me, I will introduce you to Marina. Leave the talking to me." Kevin let JJ's hand go and walked back to the car parked behind JJ's truck. JJ followed the two cars to their destination. To meet this Marina and join this group she is creating. JJ was tapping his fingers on the steering wheel the whole time, glancing up his rearview mirror nervously. He heard Sean's voice speak out as if he was sitting in the seat right beside him. "Are you sure you can trust this guy?" JJ knew for sure he must be losing it. Here JJ was not only talking to himself but, it seems, to take the form of his dead brother. "No, but it is the only chance I have to bring them all down." JJ glanced over to the empty passenger seat, but in his mind his brother was there. "JJ, you are going to get yourself killed." "Then what would Mom do?" Sean asked. JJ got a little flustered. "Sean, I'm doing this because they killed you, and they were going to get away with it. Nothing or no one is going to stand in my way. If I die, you best bet they will coming to hell with me." He kept his eyes on the road and focus on the car in front of him. "Are you sure you are doing this for me, or are you doing this for yourself? You are turning into the people you swore to bring to justice as a cop, JJ. This isn't right." JJ looked over at the fading image of his brother Sean. The words cut at JJ. He knew his mother needed him more than ever, but he couldn't bear to be around her. JJ could tell she blamed him somewhat for what happened to his brother, and the only way he thought he could set things right was to go after the people who were responsible. Then maybe he could put his brother to rest as well as give his mother ease. The drive was rather long and surprisingly quiet for the rest JJ's trip. No voices, just the hum of the road and the music on the radio. It was late at night and the highway was bare. The worry of being pulled over was minimal, which put JJ a little at ease. He had other things to worry about, like the fact he was getting involved with a cartel. The worst kind of people that you could be involved with. He had seen enough TV and movies depicting the violence, not to mention stories in the law enforcement community. Not much of their brutality reached the small city he served in, but he was not ignorant to the fact of them. JJ knew this was bigger than him, and if Kevin was truly inside and needed help taking them down, then JJ would help as much as possible. He was on the wrong side of heaven and headed to the righteous side of hell. The little journey took at least 6 hours to reach the southern part of Texas. JJ's nerves were on edge the whole time, but it wasn't until they pulled off the highway did it kick into overdrive. His sweaty palms gripped the wheel as his stomach did somersaults. JJ wondered if he was making a mistake. If he was digging a bigger hole in which he couldn't escape, but the memories of his brother and the way he looked laying on the floor of that hotel room pressed him forward. The Spanish mansion sat back in the hills of the desert, lighting up the darkness. JJ parked behind the two cars and waited for Kevin. His eyes wandering over the home and the men standing outside. Kevin walked over to the front of the truck. He then motioned to JJ to turn his engine off and to follow him inside. JJ did as Kevin motioned, the little Cajun putting so much trust into this male he barely just met. For all JJ knew, Kevin would have been lying and drawing JJ out there to kill him. JJ kept his cool as well as his thoughts and voices to himself. He knew what cartels were made of. They were the people you didn't mess with. The worst of the worst, and this small-town Cajun was walking into the lion's den. There was no turning back now. Chapter 22. The large house looked like an oasis out in the desert as its light pierced through the darkness. The cold night air, along with the unknown certainty of this place, sent a shiver up the spine of the Cajun. His boots scuffed against the cracked dried earth, kicking up a little dust as he made his way towards the front door. Of course, the two men at the main entrance had to pat him down. They removed his handgun and pocket knife before motioning him in to follow Kevin. "Just try and let me do most of the talking." Kevin spoke so only him and JJ could hear as he escorted him through the grand entranceway and towards what looked like a den area. JJ never been in such a huge house, except for the shadows on the tech, which was an old plantation home JJ went on a school field trip to tour. This house made the tech look like an outhouse. It was massive. He could hear his mother complaining now how she would never be able to clean this whole house. He looked behind him and noticed his boots tracking in mud but didn't care. If these people could afford this big house, then they could afford to clean the mess. "Kevin, glad to see you back so soon." Marina spoke in English, but with a slight hint of a Mexican accent. She rose from her chair and walked over towards the two males. Marina adjusted her dark suit jacket as her heels clicked. She stood about 5 feet 9 inches in heels, and her long caramel hair almost matched her skin tone. She wore very light makeup and simple jewelry. A very modest, well-presented businesswoman. JJ could tell by the way she held herself, her stance and even walk demanded respect. Her heels clicked on as they were the only thing that could be heard as it echoed off the marble. The white floor was so clean and shiny it almost reflected like a mirror. Well, it was until the Cajun tracked in his mess. JJ could see 2 guards were posted at every door. He knew these people didn't mess around, and he should be on his best behavior. His stomach twisted in knots from anticipation. JJ wasn't even sure these people would welcome him in being an ex-law officer. He had put his very life in the hands of this Kevin whom he just recently met, but it was the only way he could get close to the people responsible for Sean's death. There was no turning back now. "Who is your friend?" Marina tilted her head and looked over at JJ. JJ removed his hat like a gentleman and tried to fix his mess of a hair. "JJ Simoneaux, ma'am." He held out his hand. Marina walked from in front of Kevin toward JJ, who was not far behind. The corner of her lips curved upwards in a smirk as she reached out and took his hand. "Nice to know you found someone with manners, Marina Alvarez." Her well-manicured hand shook his firmly and let it go. Kevin kept a warm smile on his face as he watched the two interact. "Jonathan here will fit very nicely in the organization you are putting together." Marina turned her head a little to glance at Kevin and then back at JJ. It was as if her hazel eyes seemed to peer into his soul. "He has been an informant for me in the local police department and recently proved to me that he could get the job done by taking care of our congressman problem." Marina listened to Kevin all the while looking JJ. JJ noticed how easy Kevin lied to Marina and how believable he was. Marina was quite attractive, but her deadly stare made JJ a bit uncomfortable. He could not make out what she might do and wondered what the hell she was thinking. Her glare eased up and a smile replaced it. "Come, sit and make yourself at home. I would like to hear more about you." Marina turned and walked back to the small section of white leather furniture. Kevin used a slight nod to motion JJ to follow her. JJ fiddled with his camo hat a bit and took a long deep breath. He followed the woman down into the den area and took a seat in front of her. He sank a bit in the soft leather and placed his hands and hat in his lap. Kevin sat in the small recliner on the right of JJ, and Marina was situated across from JJ in the love seat. JJ looked down at the glass coffee table a bit. Lit candles surrounded a bowl full of decorations, and they were accompanied by a small tablet and pen. "So, you think you can handle joining the devils?" Marina broke the silence. The devils? JJ lifted a brow and looked at her nervously. Kevin let out a chuckle. Sorry, Marina, I didn't run everything past him. I only told him of the basics, like him working with me in an organization. I have his file here. He snapped his fingers for one of his men to hand a file to Marina. She reached out and took it slowly. I see. Well, Mr. Simoneaux, I am putting together an elite group of individuals. Those persons will work under my command only. As you can tell, my father is the leader of the Alvarez cartel, and we have recently broadened ourselves by traveling to other countries, as well as legitimizing our business ventures. We not only run the drug trade, but we dabble in the gun trade and several other legitimate businesses as well. Our recent buyers and partners in these businesses give us a foothold in the country of Ukraine and Russia. Anyways, with our expansions we need to bump up our security. I am putting together military as well as other soldiers to work for our family, but this team of devils will be the best of the best. Sent out on the most extreme and dangerous missions, we will be the most feared and respected group in the world. There will be 6 men and women, the devils, including me, your leader Lucifer. JJ lifted a brow a bit as she called herself Lucifer. What? Are you a religious man, Mr. Simoneaux? She asked as JJ looked back down at the coffee table and shook his head. Not really, I used to go to church and all, but… Marina kept her grin on her face. My abuela, my grandma was, she was heavy into the Catholic Church. JJ could tell Marina must have had bad memories of her, since her voice went bitter as she almost hissed out the words. She would often call me Lucifer or Satan, so who am I to not live up to the name? Marina cursed under her breath in Spanish. JJ didn't know Spanish. The only other language he knew was a little Cajun French. He may not have known what she said, but he knew Marina and her abuela were not on the best of terms. This old lady must have messed her up somehow. Not that being in a drug criminal enterprise was bad enough, it wasn't a surprise her family would be just as dysfunctional. Marina's mood changed almost instantly as she flipped through JJ's file. What did Kevin have in that file on him? And what was up with this crazy woman? JJ asked himself. It says here you blew up the congressman? How interesting. Another long pause before she closed the file and placed it on the table. I see that you used to be a cop. Why did you quit? She asked, staring over at JJ. She is studying him carefully, like a lioness watching her prey. JJ was a bit nervous, but he tried his best not to show it. He pushes it back and let his other side take over, not the funny sweet JJ, but his demon side, the side she obviously wanted to see. The department was responsible for the death of my brother, they tried to cover it up. His own cold eyes meet hers. It wasn't a lie, the department withheld information from him. No one screws my family over, not even a rich haughty trash who wipes his butt with money, not anyone. Marina blinked slowly as she sat up some. And you didn't want just his life, but everything he owned. His life, his home, his belongings. Such greed. She rose up from the couch and walked over to the bar to the far left. Tell me, my greedy little Cajun, could you handle working for me? This is not some backwoods justice, this is the big leagues. She paused to pour herself, Kevin, and JJ drink. She brought the 3 glasses over to them. Kevin took his and thanked her with a nod. JJ watched her walk towards him with the glass filled with amber liquid. You understand, that right? You must have, being you stepped over that threshold and into this house. You screw me over, and not only you, but your family, your friends, even your dog will not be safe. I will wipe this earth of your whole generation if need be. Do you understand me?" she said, handing him the drink. JJ slid up to the edge of the couch and looked her straight in the eyes. He reached out for the glass and gripped it in his hands. She let her hand slide off the glass and rest on her own. "Of course, like any deal with the devil, you practically have my soul." He downed the drink. Marina smiled and sipped her. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Simoneaux." She looked over at Kevin before walking out the room. JJ sat the glass down on the coffee table and cursed to himself. He was not only going after this highly organized criminal enterprise, but after a woman who called herself the devil. This Kevin better have great intel as well as evidence. JJ didn't exactly know how he fit in helping Kevin, but he would dig a little farther into this cartel and see how they were connected to Sean's death like Kevin informed him. JJ knew he was too involved to turn back now, too far down into the rabbit hole. Chapter 23. 2 years later, the Alvarez cartel carved a bloody path with violence and power. This brutality helped them make their way up the ranks to be the top cartel in Mexico. The family cartel had started in the 30s during Prohibition days, running whiskey up to the States. This gave them a firm footing and built their foundation. In the 90s, the cartel jumped at the opportunity to get into the cocaine business and flourished even more at the death of Pablo Escobar. Currently, the cartel has broadened their trade into guns as well as other goods all over the world. Marina's father praised her for wanting to further her career in the family business. He taught her everything he knew and allowed her to form her little group to aid in the new business. The cartel expanded their trade with the Ukraine rebel groups as well as other countries. Marina took in a member from each country to be a liaison of sorts between the two. Marina, of course, was the first of the fallen, or Lucifer as she referred herself. Kevin O'Neill as well as JJ and Nathaniel Steel, an ex-Navy SEAL, would aid in the United States effort. Her military was able to act openly in Mexico, but the states were not so easy to make moves in. Mariana appointed missions to these three for set things. Kevin mostly worked alongside her father, but also with Marina as to look after her for Senor Alvarez. Violet Bello, or Vespa, was the daughter of one of the main members of the Ukraine-Russian rebel group. They appointed her to the group as a member from their origination. Derek Line was from a member of an Irish organization, and lastly Coho Falana from a rebel group in Kenya, Africa. Each member bringing their expertise as well as men to aid in the business between the cartel and their own organization. Each member was given a codename that related to the 7 deadly sins. Marina Pride, Nathaniel Wrath, Derek Sloth, Violet Vespa Lust, Johnny Greed, Coho Gluttony, Kevin Envy. The 7 devils were known and feared across not only Mexico but also throughout the world. No smart business organization would dare mess with the Alvarez cartel or anyone doing business with them. They knew all too well what would happen to not only them but their business, associates and even family. The heaviest pull the group had was in Mexico. Often the members of the group would set up altars on the side of the road in front of business to Santissima Muerte, or Saint of Death. Her skeletal frame would be covered like the Virgin Mary, and around her they would lay beads, feathers and offerings such as animals, and in most extreme situations human remains. Nuestra Señora de la Santa Muerte, or, colloquially, Santa Muerte, Spanish for Holy Death, is a female folk saint venerated primarily in Mexico, a personification of death. She is associated with healing, protection, and safe delivery to the afterlife by her devotees. Despite opposition by the Catholic Church, her cult arose from popular Mexican folk belief. The worship of Santa Muerte is condemned by the Catholic Church in Mexico as invalid, but it is firmly entrenched among a small percentage of Mexican culture. Santa Muerte generally appears as a female skeletal figure, clad in a long robe and holding one or more objects, usually a scythe and a globe. Her robe can be of any color, as more specific images of the figure vary widely from devotee to devotee, and according to the rite being performed or the petition being made. As the worship of Santa Muerte was clandestine until the 20th century, most prayers and other rites have been traditionally performed privately in the home. Marina admired this goddess of death and allowed her men and women to continue to place altars. It gave her people not only fear but purpose. JJ grew darker each passing day. Although he didn't give in to this death worship, his relationship with God was waning. The savage world of killing and mutilation sucked him in. Not only did he need to keep his cover to help Kevin obtain information, he also needed to keep a sane head. He would let his demon out to play, but had to keep it on a short leash so it wouldn't overpower him. JJ had to keep the mentality that he was cleaning up the streets by killing the other rival drug dealers or gang members that crossed the Alvarez cartel's path. Anything to keep him from thinking about working for the very people responsible for Sean's death. The very people that he had sworn to put away. Yes, they were all bad people, but the innocent ones that got in the way, those were the ones that tore at JJ's conscience. The Cajun could only pray that Kevin would have enough on Senor Alvarez soon. He would play to Marina's sick orders all the while trying to figure how he was going to cut her down. What better way to study your enemy than to befriend them? The same logic Kevin was using for his operation of 3 years. 3 years undercover for the CIA. Johnny couldn't see how Kevin has kept his sanity. JJ was fighting to keep his own cool for the small amount of time he had been in this horrendous company. The Cajun had seen far more ghastly sights than he could ever imagine. Bodies mowed down in the middle of the street, others burned alive in barrels, and even some beheaded medieval style. Joking about it was the only way JJ could cope with it. This was something he learned as a police officer. You couldn't let it bother you, or it would eat you up inside, and JJ could not afford to snap any more than he was. He already heard voices. The voice of his dead brother, and the demon's voice egging him on, sometimes even talking to himself out loud. Many thought he was mental, but you had to be to fit in with this group. Marina considered JJ her little comedian, and always enjoyed a good laugh when he was around. Nathaniel thought he was an idiot. He only put up with him for Marina's sake. It wouldn't be until this one mission that Nate would come to respect JJ. JJ drove out of Mexico and towards the Texas border, while Nate sat in the passenger seat quietly. JJ had mixed emotions about Nate. He saw him as this uptight military guy who was too good to speak to you. Other times JJ saw him as the silent tough macho type like a Bruce Willis or Clint Eastwood. Nathaniel was quick, cold and calculated. JJ didn't know much about him, except for the fact the Navy SEALs screwed him over, and Nate was one not to be messed with. Vespa, or Violent, took a liking to Nate. But she did that with everyone really. JJ thought she was one twisted little skank, avoided her as much as possible. A lot of the devils lived up to their codenames. Marina was a very good judge of character. Something she must have picked up from her father. She ran the business quite well and stayed true to the fear factor. She knew which devil would work well with each other, and where to send them to do the most damage. She didn't care how they did the job, just if it was completed. This little endeavor, or rather you could say a large, was to wipe out a local gang in Texas. This large and up-and-coming gang, Tres Reyes, Three Kings, had took it upon themselves to make off with drugs from the Nino gang, which was appointed by the Alvarez cartel. Marina sent JJ and Nate down to take out the whole enterprise down to the last minion. She wanted each of the Three Kings' head on a pike. This would be a large job for the two, but Marina had no doubt they could accomplish it. If they needed reinforcements, all the devils would have to do is get in contact with the Nino gang on the other side the border, the gang under the control of the cartel. The Cajun leaned back in his seat some and hummed along with the radio. They were approaching the border and would soon be over to the U.S. territory. He glanced over at Nate, who was staring out the window, and cleared his throat a bit before speaking. The drive up to this point had been awkwardly silent. "Did you contact the Ninos or whatever the hell they call themselves?" JJ asked Nate as he glanced over at him, and then back to the line of cars ahead of him. "Yes, one of them will meet us at a safe house." JJ was shocked. He said more than 2 words. "When we cross over I will give you the address." Nate continued as he slipped his cell phone from his pocket. Johnny pulled up at the border patrol and waited. Even if they were detained, the cartel had most of the patrolmen in their back pockets. Luckily there was not a problem and Johnny drove straight on through. JJ stopped once to fuel up and grab a bite to eat. Still Nate was quiet, and it was killing JJ not to have a conversation. He knew he wouldn't talk about his personal life, so JJ poked around the mission. He needed to talk about something and someone other than himself. "Do you know how many members of this gang we have to take out?" JJ asked, shifting in the driver's seat of the truck. "Nope." Nate gave the usual one-word response. "You know, Nate, you don't talk much." JJ huffed, a bit aggravated. Only Nate's eyes moved to glance at the fidgeting Cajun. "Yup." Nate then looked back at his phone and scrolled through it. "What time you think we will make it there?" JJ pressed on. Nate looked at the time, then calculated a bit. 10 by the most. JJ let out a laugh as Nate looked over at him like he was crazy. "Got you to say more than one word, John Wayne." Nate just rolled his eyes and simply said "uh-huh." Nate was right as usual. JJ pulled up at the safe house at 10 o'clock that night. He parked the truck and hopped out. JJ yawned and stretched a bit. Nate exited the truck as well and looked around as he made his way to the door. JJ grabbed the 2 large duffel bags and locked the door before closing it. He then followed Nate up the inclined driveway. The motion light activated and lit up the small yard as the 2 men walked up to the front door. Nate used the back of his knuckle to tap lightly on the red wooden door. His other hand sat on his pistol that was hidden on his waistband. A Latin male in his mid-20s answered the door. "You two are early. I wasn't expecting you till the morning." He opened the door and allowed them to pass. "Name's Alejandro, it is just me here. The rest of the boys are out patrolling. The house is yours, make yourselves at home." He locked the door behind JJ. Alejandro was only about 5 foot tall and skinny as a rail. His clothes were twice his size and hung off him. Alejandro had to hold up his pants as he stood there so they wouldn't fall off him. Nate walked in and looked over the home, going through every room, while JJ stood in the living room. Nate came back out and nodded to let JJ know everything was clear. JJ dropped the 2 bags on the floor and glanced over at Alejandro. "You got anything to eat?" JJ asked as he stretched a little bit more. "Yeah, got a couple pizzas and beer in the fridge." He pointed to the kitchen before walking to the couch and sitting down. JJ and Nate both walked to the kitchen. JJ reached in and grabbed them each a beer. The Cajun then handed it to Nate, who leaned against the cabinet eating a slice pizza. The house was unkempt and a bit messy. It looked like it needed a bunch of work, with the brown leak stains that ran along the ceiling and the floor stained with God knows what. JJ sipped his beer and looked around the kitchen and then towards the living room. "This your house?" he asked, reaching for a slice of pizza behind Nate. "Nah, we just use it for hiding out and laying low, you know," Alejandro answered JJ. "A lot of the boys are messy and sometimes throw parties." He tried to make an excuse for the mess and state of the house. "My moms would kill me if I did this to her house," he added. "Amen," JJ agreed on the whole mothers and messes. "They have 2 bedrooms. I will stay and keep watch," Alejandro continued. "I know you two have a big day tomorrow." JJ finished his pizza and his first beer. "That we do, you coming with?" he asked, grateful to have someone to talk to. "Hell yeah, it will be part of my initiation." Alejandro was a bit too excited about that part. JJ grabbed another slice of pizza, as did Nate, who remained quiet as usual. "Should be interesting," JJ added in. "I heard you guys are the baldest of the bad, yo, and it is an honor to help you two out, you feel me, cuz?" Alejandro threw up a couple of the gang signs. "Uh-huh." Nate pushed off the counter and took his beer along with him. Nate then bent down to grab his duffel bag and walked to a bedroom, slamming the door behind him. "Did I say something wrong?" Alejandro asked, all nervous and jittery. JJ let out a chuckle and walked into the living room. He then plopped down in the recliner with a piece of pizza sticking out his mouth. "No, that is just how he is. You should have heard him on the way up here." "Well, you didn't hear him, cause Nate doesn't talk." "Name's JJ, by the way." Johnny introduced himself. "The greedy Cajun, right?" Alejandro asked, and JJ answered him with a slight nod. "And that is the wrathful bull Nathaniel?" He pointed with his thumb towards the bedroom where Nate locked himself. "Yep, the very one." JJ finished his pizza and wiped his hands on his jeans. "Man, you two are legends, man. I heard nothing but rad stories about you and the other devils. You are like the sickest and most fear group, man. No mercy, just medieval." JJ sipped his beer and listened to the man ramble on. "Pretty much, we are the ones you call in when something major is about to go down, like tomorrow. We have orders to take out the whole gang. From the bottom to the top 3 kings." JJ reclined the recliner back and got comfortable. "I hear that. Well, I'm down with whatever, man. You just tell me what you need, and I got you." JJ pulled down his hat over his face. "You got it." He then proceeded to drift asleep. JJ was woken up by Nate hitting the recliner footrest with his boot. "Hey, Johnny. Get up," Nate grumbled in his usual grumpy voice. Johnny shot up and removed the hat from his face. The half bottle of beer spilt on his jeans and JJ cursed. "All right, I'm up. I'm up." Johnny put the bottle on the ground and closed the recliner down. Nathaniel was already dressed in a bulletproof vest and an assault rifle hanging from his neck. JJ heard a faint noise coming from the kitchen and guessed it must have been the little Latin guy. JJ looked at his phone in his pocket for the time. He squinted at the bright screen to make out the little numbers. "Kind of early, huh, Nate?" JJ asked after making out the time being 4 am. JJ tossed his Cajun gun and tackle camo hat on his duffel bag and slowly stood up. "We have a lot to do today and in a short amount of time." Nate watched him a bit before checking his pouch on his belt. "All right, let me get changed." JJ cracked his neck as he yawned and bent down to grab his duffel bag. Alejandro came walking and drinking a bottle of water and holding his pants up. JJ noticed him and lowered his head, shaking it. "Ale, my man. If you are coming along with us, can you please find a belt, a rope or duct tape? I don't want to see your butt or see you when you can't run and trip and bust your butt." JJ slowly stood up with his change of clothes in his grip. "No problem, boss." Alejandro turned to walk back in the kitchen. JJ watched him a moment before glancing at Nate. Nate was just standing there with an unamused look on his face. JJ could tell he was growing impatient. "I'm going, Lieutenant," and JJ mumbled as he stumbled past Nate and towards the bathroom. He was still half asleep and had to use the door frame to catch himself from falling over. "Mr. G.I. Joe here, and then we got tattooed trying to wear grown-up pants, de plain more like de pants," JJ mumbles to himself, poking fun of Nate and Alejandro, using his normal movie references. He finally reached the bathroom and closed the door. JJ changed and finished up in the bathroom and walked out to the empty living room. He knew Nate would have gathered everything and would be waiting in the car. Johnny tightened his bulletproof jacket and then began to stuff extra magazine clips and tear gas in the pockets. He patted down the flaps to make sure the Velcro stuck before bending down to grab the duffel bag. He stuffed his dirty clothes on top the other guns and various weapons still inside the bag. He dug in and took out his old gas mask and placed it on top of his head. It was something he was known to wear ever since that night when he killed the congressman. It was like his signature, his disguise. When the Cajun put that mask on, he was a completely different person. JJ walked out of the house and locked it behind him. In the driveway sat a running car with the headlights beaming through the darkness. He knew Nate would be in the passenger seat, so JJ walked around to get in the back seat behind him. JJ slid himself and his bag in and closed the door behind him. Some of the boys tracked down one of the kings. "They are holding him for you. Others are taking out some of the lower-level gang members, but they knew to leave the 3 kings for you," Alejandro explained. "Well, let's see if he will spill where the other 2 are." Nate nodded to Alejandro to signal him to drive. Alejandro backed up onto the quiet street and drove towards where this leader was being held. JJ drummed his fingers nervously on his knee. Even after all this time, after the countless missions and hits, JJ's stomach still turned in knots. It would be stupid of him not to be a little afraid. Afraid he would be exposed to his true intentions, afraid to be shot and killed before he could help Kevin finish with his mission to bring the cartel down, or even more afraid of him losing all control of himself and going manic. The voices started acting up again, but JJ pushed them back inside as he started to a foreigner song. Alejandro looked over at Nate with furrowed brows. Nate kept his gaze on the road ahead. The sawlighter was used to the Cajun's crazy ways, that or he could care less. Jukebox Haru, he got stars in his ace. JJ sang out before humming some more to himself. Alejandro turned off the main highway and down a suburban street. The sun started to peak above the horizon, giving an eerie glow on the houses lined the block. JJ rolled down the window to let some fresh air slap his face. He needed to be fully awake and calm for what was about to go down. As the little Latino made another turn, gunfire could be heard in the distance. Nate sat attentively up and squinted his eyes. Cars were parked all along one house at the end of the block. The very house they were heading to. JJ rolled the window up and leaned in the middle of them to look for himself. He could make out guys running around, and some even falling to the ground. "Park over here." Nate pointed to the side the road as his hand then rested on the door handle. JJ took a deep breath and gripped his own rifle, remaining calm like Nate. Alejandro pulled over and parked on the curb. JJ could see the fear in the young man's eyes as he looked to Nate for further instructions. "I'm guessing the other gang came to rescue their king? We need to hurry before the cops show up," JJ commanded. "Oh no cops come down here. They are paid off by the kings." Alejandro looked back at JJ and then to Nate. Nate kept his eyes focused straight ahead. Johnny could tell he was planning the assault in his head. "Well, that is one less thing we have to worry about. Make sure you let the others know the kings are on to us and that they need to carry out orders as quickly as possible." Ale fumbled in his pocket quickly at JJ's words. JJ sat up again and looked over at Nate, ignoring Ale's shaking hands. "What you thinkin'?" JJ asked as he studied Nate's face before looking at the chaos in front of them. "Alejandro, I need you to create a distraction in the front while I go around back. You cut them off on the side and we flank them," Nate explained. "Distraction?" Ale asked with a slight shaking in his voice. JJ unzipped his duffel bag and handed him a couple of pineapple grenades. "Distraction." JJ gave Alejandro a wicked but delighted look. The young man swallowed hard and took them. Nate kept his focus ahead as he exited the vehicle. JJ was right behind him as they kept low and branched off from Alejandro. Alejandro creeps forward, praying to himself as the two devils made their way through backyards. The people of this neighborhood knew better than to come out during gunfire. The two didn't have to really worry about anyone stopping them. Nate led JJ onward in full soldier mood. That is what JJ always called it. Him and JJ worked well together. Nate always coming up with the plans and JJ being the crazy white boy to go through with them. He could never understand why Nate joined this group. He must have done something bad to be kicked out of the Navy SEALs. JJ always wanted to ask him, but knew Nate would never be open to tell him. Nate turned slightly to motion to JJ he was heading around back. JJ saluted him with 2 fingers and walked forward to the side door. He placed his body flat against the panels and waited for the big boom. JJ could hear gunfire and the screams coming from the other gangsters. It echoed from the front of the house like an eerie death song. The sun was shining bright in the sky now, lighting up the battle. JJ slowly pulled down his gas mask and took long, slow breaths as he prepared himself. The mask muffled out some of the gunfire, but not the loud boom from the explosion. Little Alejandro did it. Now it was go time. JJ lifted the window and wiggled inside quickly. He could hear muffled gunshots coming from the back. Nate undoubtedly made his way through the thugs trying to flee out the back. JJ rounded the corner and raised his AR-15 up and popped off rounds. He hit 2 guys as they ran towards Nate. Nate turned and nodded as he raised his shirt to cover his nose, as to not inhale the smoke. JJ pointed to his gas mask as if to poke fun. Nate rolled his eyes and turned to check the rooms. The two made their way through the house, clearing each room, while Alejandro and a few of his gang members shot at the rival ones. The house was littered in bullet holes, while half the living room area was on fire from the explosion. Bodies were strung here and there, but a few gang members were still alive. It was a scene right out of a war movie, JJ thought, but it was nothing new to them. Alejandro and his men advanced inside, while Nate and JJ made their way to the last room. A king must have been held inside. The two devils stopped outside of the door and looked at each other. JJ removed a can from one of his pouches and bent down on the ground. He unraveled the small clear plastic tube and slid it under the door. He began spraying the freeze pepper spray. It was a toxic batch of tear gas and pepper spray. They knew if they would just break down the door, one of them would be shot, so JJ was going to smoke them out. A few minutes passed and there was coughing coming from inside the room. JJ removed the can and placed it back in his pouch. Nate paused and listened intently to the movement on the other side the wall. The doorknob turned and then swung open. A couple men spilled out and was shortly mowed down by JJ and Nate. JJ turned the corner to see the last male trying to escape from the window. He quickly fired a couple rounds in his back and walked into the room. Nate finished clearing the room as JJ grabbed the lifeless body and pulled him inside. Alejandro limped around the corner. Blood leaked down his leg where he had been shot. Nate removed his shirt from his nose and glanced over at him. "You got the king, I see." Alejandro leaned against the wall, huffing in pain. "Well, one of them anyways," JJ clarified. "I thought you needed him alive?" Alejandro asked, looking between the two males. Nate removed a large knife from a pouch on his vest. "Nope. Just his head." "Alejandro, tell your men to gather the bodies and head out to this location." JJ handed Alejandro a piece of paper. The Latin man hobbled over and took the paper from the Cajun and limped out. "I don't see why we have to do all this." JJ shook his head. "You know Marina and her theatrics." Nate frowned a bit more as he put his knife away. He turned and walked out the room, leaving a small trail of blood. JJ shrugged and grabbed the ankle of the body. The Cajun whistled and made an even bigger trail as he dragged the body behind him, following Nate. The two reached outside and glanced over at the three guys piling bodies in a truck. Nate tossed a head at one of them, and the guy caught it, almost screaming. "Take all the bodies and pile them at the location. Except leave the heads of the three kings for us to arrange," Nate explained to the man. He nodded and went back to his duty. "Alejandro, can you still drive?" JJ asked as he dropped the body by the others and lifted his mask. "Yeah, why?" he asked, standing up straight, ready to jump to any command. "'Cause we need to see someone about a car." JJ grinned a bit and glanced over at Nate. Nate gave him a look and tried not to crack his own smile. "Was that a smile?" JJ asked as the two made their way to the car. "No," Nate said in a stern voice. Alejandro pulled up a block away from the mechanical garage and parked his car. He held on to his leg in pain and waited for orders. The shop was not a very large building. It had about 6 metal doors along the side where the cars would be brought in. The back behind it was fenced in and held a couple cars, most likely stole ones to be chopped, and the drugs stuffed inside. The front was the business area, which held a front waiting area and receptionist desk, along with a couple offices. It was well kept up, and the gang must have also used it for fixing the public's cars due to the signs and the bright flags blowing in the breeze. Chapter 24. At this point the other gang was on full alert, and for sure they would have the last king surrounded and heavily guarded. "Stay here." Nate grabbed his duffel bag and made his way towards the building. JJ sat up and patted Alejandro on the shoulder. "Stay here and call in the others. You did good, kid." He gave him a warm smile before sliding out the car and following Nate. "So, what is the plan?" JJ asked as he walked beside Nathaniel. "Kill them all." He paused to drop his duffel bag and unzipped it. He attached a scope to his rifle, as well as placed more clips on his vest. JJ dropped his bag beside Nate's and took out C4 along with tape. Nate lifted a brow at the sight of the C4. "You know how to mess with that, Cajun?" he asked, watching JJ stuff the explosives in his pockets. Kinda, he shrugged his shoulders as Nate sighed. C4 needs an electronic charge to detonate. Nate went to continue to explain, but he was cut off by a hailstorm of bullets flying by them. The gang had spotted them, and the two devils scattered. Nate went in through the open metal garage door, while JJ ran into the front part of the building. He burst through the glass door and slid across the glass. JJ slammed into the front desk and groaned a bit as he sat up on his bottom. Luckily no one was in the front part. The rest of the gang must have been in the back. The back where Nate ran into. Dang it. JJ groaned as he slowly stood up. A couple of glass shards fell off his messy hair and back. The gas mask had sunk a little on his face, but luckily it still sat on his head. The black leather had collected some of the glass from the broken door as it almost stuck to his face. JJ reached up and brushed the remaining pebbles off and adjusted the mask on top of his head. His boots make them crunch as he slowly walked to the back side of the office. There was a blue metal door with a small window that connected the shop with the front. JJ crept down and walked over to the window. He slowly poked his head up to peek inside the garage area. Mela, he whispered to himself as he noticed Nate on the ground surrounded by the other gang members. Leave him. His demon appeared beside him. Mr. Macho got himself in this mess, and it is one less person you have to go through. Sean's voice appeared on the other side of him. Johnny, you can't leave him. Nate may be rough around the edges, but he is your partner, and he is a good man deep down. JJ slid down the door and listened to the voices in his head argue. He is just going to get us killed. His demon hissed. You can't leave him to die. JJ growled and squeezed his temples with his palms. Will you two shut up so I can think? He squeezed his eyes closed, trying to think of something. I got it. JJ hopped up and made his way outside. There is a house down in New Orleans they call the Rising Sun. JJ sang to shut up and ignore the two other voices fighting. He walked out the front busted doors. And it's been the ruin of many young boy, and God knows. I'm one. He sang as he aimed his rifle and shot the two on top the roof. JJ then took off running towards the forklift parked by the fence. He slung the rifle to his side and walked to the propane bottle on the back of it. JJ untied the tank and quickly waddled over to one of the garage doors. He sat it down on the concrete and took off back a few feet. The Cajun then took a brick of the C4 out, and with all his force, he threw it at the propane tank and ducked behind the forklift. He covered his ears, but nothing happened. He then poked his head up to see the brick laying by the tank. JJ frowned and quickly got up. He took out the tape from his pocket and then quickly taped the brick of C4 to the tank. When he was finished, he ran back to the spot he was hiding before for cover. He bent down to one knee and removed his sidearm, while he covered one ear with his left hand and used his right to lift his pistol. He aimed and fired a round at the C4 on the tank. The bullet ricocheted off the side the tank and hit the brick wall behind it. JJ cursed and jumped up and down with frustration. Another brick of C4 fell out his pocket on the ground and in his rage, he kicked it. It bounced a little in the dirt as JJ hit the side of his mask with the butt of his pistol in his hand. He knew he needed to hurry and get inside, for Nate could only have seconds if he wasn't dead already. JJ stopped pacing when his demon voice spoke up. Electronic charge to detonate, dummy. JJ stopped mid-step and nodded. Oh yeah. He then ran to the back and hopped the fence. He landed on the ground and took off running to the cars lined up against the fence line. He opened the car and started yanking out wires. After he had a good handful, he stuffed them in his pockets and made his way back over the fence. JJ then ran to the extra brick lying on the ground, snagged it and dashed to the propane tank. He then began to rig up wires from his phone to the other wires. He didn't know exactly what he was doing, but prayed it would work. He then stuck the wires in the C4 and taped it all up good and tight before taking off back inside the office part of the building. He peeked through the window and noticed a guy punching Nate in the face. JJ winced at the hit, but at least he was still alive. "Hold on, buddy," JJ says as he slides behind the desk and picks up the phone. JJ dials the number and waits. The explosion shook the building with force. JJ tossed the phone down and pulled his gas mask down. The raging Cajun ran to the blue metal door and kicked it in. He raised his rifle and yelled in a singing voice, "Don't stop believing!" Bullets mowed down the first row of gangsters as JJ sang out the Journey song. The others ran for cover behind machines. Nate slumped over and rolled on his back. JJ then popped a couple cans of tear gas and hailed it over towards the men. The men stopped shooting for a moment and began coughing. Some scattered and running out the building while others lay unconscious from the blast. JJ advanced forward and shot them as they tried to run. He finally made it to Nate, who was slipping in and out of consciousness. JJ bent down and gripped his wrist in one hand and began to drag him back towards the front by the offices. Nate came to a bit and glanced up to see the smoky image of JJ dragging him. He then glanced in the other direction at the gangsters fumbling over themselves. JJ zigzagged through the few bodies on the ground as he tried to drag Nate to safety. They still had a good number of men still alive who fired back at the two. Nate shook himself awake and grabbed his side pistol. As JJ dragged the wounded soldier, Nate fired at the men, giving the Cajun cover to help him out of there. JJ reached a car that was closer than the blue metal door. He dropped Nate's wrist and turned to pick him up under his arms. JJ dragged Nate behind the parked car inside the garage and sat him against it carefully. Nate's eye was already turning black and blue, as a cut above his eye made a trail of blood trickle down. "You alright?" JJ knew he wasn't, but he needed to know how bad he was hurt. Nate ejected his empty clip and reached in his pouch for a new one. "Cracked rib, bullet clipped my leg, and I think a cracked skull." Nate spit the blood out his mouth on the floor. "I see you got the C4 to work." JJ lifted his gas mask and gave Nate a look. "I don't even want to talk about that right now." Johnny peeked over to see what the others were up to. The smoke slowly started to disappear from the garage through the massive hole JJ blew in the side the building. JJ peeked up and watched as the gangsters fumbled over themselves trying to find the two devils. "You think you can finish the job, buddy, pal?" JJ asked as his eyes shifted from Nate back to the gangsters. JJ lifted his rifle and shot an advancing thug. The man dropped to the ground dead. "We have a job to do." Nate grunted as he cocked back the slide and loaded his pistol. His R-15 was taken by the gangsters, so he was stuck using his sidearm. "I hope Alejandro and the cavalry show up soon," JJ added in as he aimed and shot at another thug. "Yeah, well, this is our job." Nate let out a groan as he sat up to look over the car. He wiped the blood out of his eye and watched the chaos. Bullets began to fly by the two as the thugs tried to give cover for their king boss. JJ and Nate fired back, but now they were pinned down due to heavy fire. Nate grew tired of the situation and intended on getting them to advance. He peeked into the car they were hiding behind. Luckily the keys were inside. Nate opened the door and turned the ignition, starting the car. JJ knew Nate was planning to do something. He reloaded his clip and rose up to give him cover fire. Nate turned the wheel while he grabbed a toolbox sitting on the table behind him. He took the car out of park and dropped the toolbox on the gas pedal. The car peeled out and headed straight towards the gangsters, firing at them. It slammed into a few, as well as the lift behind them. The lift gave way and the car sitting on top of it fell on top of the few that were hiding under it. JJ helped Nate to his feet before running to kill the remaining few alive ahead of them. Nate stumbled behind JJ and headed towards his rifle that laid on the ground a few feet away. Bending over, Nate glanced to notice the king, along with a couple other men running out the parking lot and towards a couple cars. "Simoneaux!" he yelled and pointed towards them. JJ spun around and looked at Nate as he pointed outward. JJ then followed his extended finger and looked out the massive hole to see the three men running. JJ ran through the still smoking hole and ran after the men. He raised his rifle and aimed while trying to keep up. He shot one of the men in the leg and aimed for the other. The man dropped down to the ground crying in agony as the others spun around to aim their guns at JJ. They popped off a couple rounds as JJ returned fire. He ran behind the parked cars for cover as the bullets bounced off the concrete. JJ peeked up to see the two men walking towards him firing their guns. JJ was out of rounds and had nothing left in his pouches. He dropped his rifle to the ground in anger and slid down the car. Kneeling down, JJ slipped out his knife and gripped it tight in his hands. He held it close to his chest as his back was pressed against the parked car on the curb. Nate must have been still dealing with the remaining people in the garage because it looked as if JJ was on his own. He took a couple breaths as he heard them approaching. He was ready to go out swinging, but suddenly Alejandro came around the corner firing his gun. It startled the two men that were on the other side the car. The thug and king turned and started to fire back at Alejandro. The poor young male was outnumbered, but not for long. JJ heard the clicking when the two ran out of bullets, and JJ sprung to action. He quickly stood up and grabbed the closest man to him. He jammed the 6-inch blade hilt deep in the male's neck. The male dropped to the ground as JJ then jumped on the other male. The two landed on the ground with the Cajun on top, his fist wailing away on the man's face. JJ slammed his knuckles into the face of the last leader standing. The mighty king on his back tried to escape the fury of the Cajun, but it was in vain. JJ let his demon overtake him fully. All his rage and hate went into his wings. JJ didn't even stop when the man went limp. He just kept pounding and hammering into the man's face. Nate hobbled up behind Johnny and tried to yank him off, but with the soldier being injured, he stumbled back when JJ pushed him away. JJ kept on long after the man was obviously dead. Alejandro hobbled over and the two with combined strength peeled JJ off. Nate's screams went from a faint echo to pounding into JJ's ear. The Cajun snapped out of his rage and quit struggling. His hand was full of blood and shards of bone, while his arm was numb. He could barely feel it, let alone lift it up. It dangled beside him as the blood slowly dripped to the ground. Simoneaux said once more in a concerned but stern voice, "I'm all right." JJ knew what Nate was going to ask and beat him to it. Nate, being the type of person he was, didn't press the matter. The soldier had been in plenty of situations like that before and understood completely. JJ walked over and grabbed his rifle before walking back to the car. The others brought the bodies as well as the other 2 kings to that location. They are waiting for the rest of the orders. Alejandro leaned against the parked car and watched JJ walk back to his vehicle. Nate watched JJ slide into Alejandro's car, and then his eyes traveled to the mutilated body of the last king. Tell some of them to come get the rest of these bodies. You, go get our things. Make sure nothing is left behind. Alejandro hopped to his duty while Nate made his way to the car where JJ was. Nate opened the passenger door and slowly sat down. He wheezed a bit in pain as he turned to sit forward and closed the door. JJ sat in the back seat picking the bone out of his knuckles, and for once he was silent. The long pause was broken by Nate's voice. I owe you one, Simoneaux. JJ continued to nurse his hand and clean it. JJ answered him without even looking up. Nate cracked a smile as he watched the horizon. Chapter 25. Everything changes. Life, people, things, and you would be fooled to get comfortable and expect things to stay the same. JJ talked to himself as he sat at the cafe's table. Nate was in the bathroom cleaning up, while the Cajun sat thinking about what he just went through. JJ started to get a little loud as he fussed with himself, causing others in the cafe to stare. Finally, an older man stood up and walked to JJ's booth. Are you alright, son? The middle-aged man asked in a sincere voice. JJ glanced up to see who was speaking to him. JJ wanted to tell him yes so he would leave him alone, but the way he looked at JJ and his voice, it made him think of his old pastor. Not really. He sighed. The man sat on the other side on JJ. Want to talk about it? He asked. JJ shrugged a bit. Most of it could land me in jail, and the other in hell. JJ admitted. You know, if you ask God to forgive you and turn from your ways, He will, son. The man spoke softly. JJ chuckles. You sound like a preacher. I am. The preacher confessed. But how can I be forgiven? Do you even know what I have done? I used to be a good guy, a church-going police officer. Now he stopped and held back the tears and lump in his throat. Have you ever heard the story of the prodigal son? The preacher paused and waited for JJ to speak, but he didn't. The parable of the prodigal son is one of the parables of Jesus and appears in Luke 15:11-32. Jesus Christ shares it with his disciples, the Pharisees and others. In the story, a father has 2 sons. The younger son asks for his inheritance, and after wasting his fortune, becomes destitute. He returns home with the intention of begging his father to be made one of his hired servants, expecting his relationship with his father is likely severed. The father welcomes him back and celebrates his return. The older son refuses to participate. The father reminds the older son that one day he will inherit everything. But they should still celebrate the return of the younger son because he was lost and is now found. In the parable, the father is God, the good son represents the righteous, and the prodigal son represents the sinners. God gave the prodigal the freedom to choose his life, and the son chose dissolution, but when all else failed, he returned to the father. No matter what we have done, all that counts is that we go back to God. We ask for forgiveness and turn away from our sins. JJ tells him about his demons, how they haunt him about his sins and drives him crazy. How if he turns back now, all that he worked for and the knowledge he obtained to bring the people responsible for his brother's death would be in vain. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. You pray, and let God deal with them, son. I can't tell you what to do, I am only trying to help." The preacher dug in his pocket and pulled out a small Bible. He slides it across to JJ and smiled. "All the answers you seek are in here." The preacher then stood up and walked out the cafe. JJ just stared at the small leather Bible as the words the older man spoke floated in his head. He opened the leather flap, and inside was the preacher's business card. JJ noticed Nathaniel coming towards him, so he quickly placed the Bible in his bag. He wanted to avoid the conversation about it, and for the first time JJ wanted to be silent. End of Book 1. Please check out Book 2, The Good Samaritan.